All right, well, welcome. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here at our EB-5 seminar. Tonight's event is hosted by Behring Capital and Fragment Worldwide. We're here at the San Jose Marriott in the Silicon Valley, California. My name is Aaron Hammond. I've met most of you. I'm the VP of Operations here at Behring Capital. I'm going to be joined this evening by Cindy Jen and Colin Behring. Cindy is a partner and EB-5 practice leader for Fragment Worldwide. She has over 18 years of experience with immigration law. Colin Behring is the CEO of the Berkeley Regional Center. This is an accredited regional center in the Northern California area. He's also the CEO of Behring Capital. It's a real estate development and private equity firm. We have a lot on the agenda tonight. We appreciate everyone making it. While all of us are here today, while most of us are here today to talk about green cards and a final solution to your immigration, it's important to realize that EB-5 is more than just a green card program. EB-5 is a job creation program. It's an investment program in the United States. Since 2008, there's been over $34 billion in direct foreign investment from EB-5. From 2010 to 2015 alone, and that ignores the surge in EB-5 demand since 2015, $34 billion of the GDP, national GDP, was contributed because of EB-5. 10 million of that impacted California. There's been over 276,000 jobs created by EB-5, 72,000 of which were here in the state of California. There's been over $5 billion in tax revenue just in that 5-year timeline. 160 million of that impacted the state of California. So it's a very powerful program. It not only does it help families that want to immigrate here to the United States, but also really helps the United States grow and helps the people that already live here that are citizens. So tonight, Cindy and Colin will be taking you guys through a number of exciting topics. We'll be talking about the EB-5 requirements and process, as well as the current proposed legislation and how that might impact you as a prospective investor, or if you're already an existing investor. Colin will be talking about EB-5 projects, specifically the Graduate, a premier EB-5 investment opportunity that's here in the Silicon Valley. Next, we'll switch gears and we'll do a moderated Q&A session. This will be an opportunity for everyone that was able to make it today to ask questions of Cindy and Colin and really figure out answer the questions that you have as you're looking and exploring investing in EB-5. Finally, for the folks that want to attend, we'll do a walking tour of the Graduate. It's about 2 blocks from here. We'll just all go as a group and check out the construction. We're already on the 10th floor. It's progressing very nicely and it's very exciting. We thank everyone for attending today and for the folks that were able to attend online on our seminar. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Cindy Jen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. So I don't know about exciting immigration, but I will do my best to tell you about EB-5, what it means, and how you get your green card, and then we'll dive into the exciting part. Again, I'm Cindy Jen. Why am I qualified to stand here and talk to you? I am a U.S. immigration attorney, and I've been doing this business immigration strictly for 18 years. I manage the Northern California practice of EB-5, as Aaron mentioned. And today we'll go over a little bit about why Fragment, and then more about EB-5. What are the requirements? Why is it a job creation program? And then how do you apply? As an investor, how do you go through the steps of the program? And then possible anticipated changes. One of the more volatile areas of immigration is EB-5. We hear a lot of news about it. So I'll help you separate fact from fiction, what's going to happen, and then give you my crystal ball anticipations. So a little bit about Fragment. So for those of you who've been in business immigration, you may know us. We've been around for a long time, since 1951. There's over 550 attorneys in the firm, and all we do is business immigration. So maybe you haven't heard of us. We do a lot of B2B, but basically we've been around for a long time. We're quite large. We're in the AmLaw 100, top 100 largest law firms in the United States. So, and my office is actually not far from here, just down near the ballpark where there's a football game tonight. Maybe that's why there's traffic. So let me get this moving. So the requirements for EB-5. again, it's an investor visa. It's unique. I mean, EB means employment based. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And 5 is a self-sponsored visa. That means that you can actually petition for yourself. You don't need a company. You don't need an employer. You can self-sponsor yourself through an investment. So the investment is, you may have heard it called the $1 million visa, but Kyle's going to tell you that you only need to invest $500,000 in their project. And the reason is because there are certain categories of investments that only require $500,000. Now, I'll explain what TEA means in a little bit. But as Aaron rightly said, it benefits the U.S. economy. You think of it as an investor visa, a way to get your green card, but the U.S. Immigration Service and the government sees it as a benefit to the economy because there is a requirement that the investment create at least 10 U.S. jobs. And that's actually a really important part of success for EB-5. Whether or not the project you pick will create the jobs that you need to ultimately get your green card. So as an investor, one of the things you're going to need to ask is, will that happen? And just to be very clear about relationships here, I'm actually not the attorney for Behring. So my job is to be the attorney for the investors. And so I can help you ask them tough questions about job creation and things like that. How do you pick a good investment vehicle? And why would I be here, standing up here with Colin and Aaron and talking about Behring as well as EB-5 immigration? One of the most important things that you'll need to do is to prove that your investment funds come from a lawful source. Where did you get it? Where did you earn it? How did you keep it? How did it grow? Where is it now? So those are the things that you're going to need to help prove in order to participate in this program. And then there's kind of this requirement. A lot of people ask me about this. Investor must be engaged in business. That just means that you need to be an investor, that you are a shareholder or something, that you're participating in that particular investment. And you don't have to necessarily work for the company or anything. Your investment is what gets you the green card. Okay? And I mentioned TEA, and this is important because, again, what's $1 million investment versus a $500,000 investment? And that's if the project itself is in a targeted employment area. So a targeted employment area is anything that's rural, has less than 20,000 residents in it, or it has an unemployment rate that exceeds 150% the national average. And there's lots of statistics and smarter people than me who figure out how that works. And certainly, projects like the Behring one would certainly be able to prove that their project is in a TEA. So the immigration process, how do we do this? First thing you need to do really is to pick the investment vehicle. Decide where you want to invest and what you want to invest on, and figure out how much you need to make that investment. And then the first thing that we do is, as a counsel for you, for the investor, is file what's called the I-526. It's called the immigrant petition, and we file it with the U.S. Immigration Service. And then that is the petition that actually gets adjudicated that will ultimately decide whether or not you get the temporary green card. And the two things that we'll need to prove to file the I-526 is, one, that there's a valid project that you're investing in, and two, that your funds came from a lawful source. So it's like a 50-50. The project gives us half of the documents, and then the investor gives us the other half. And then you do the immigrant visa. If you're in the United States on some sort of FHL visa, you can do what's called an adjustment of status. It's a 485 that you file with the Immigration Service. And currently, I'll go through timelines, but it's not taking too long to get your green card. But once you do, you get what's called a conditional green card. It's just like a regular green card. You get the same rights and responsibilities, but it is good for 2 years, which basically means that before that 2-year expiration, your attorney is going to knock on your door at 1 year and 9 months and say, hey, we need to file the next thing, which is the I-829. There's an I-824 for something else. The I-829. And that's called the removal of conditional residency. And once we file that converts your temporary green card to a permanent green card. And that does include the investor and all your family members. So investor, spouse, and any children under the age of 21 all get green cards for one investment. I did actually do a family where they had 11 kids. Talk about a bargain for a green card. Okay, so this is kind of the timeline right now. And again, government processing times vary a lot. Right now we're in the end of the government's fiscal year, so things do drag out a little bit. But the I-526 is taking about 18 to 24 months. It varies a little bit, but that's the average right now. To do adjustment of status or consular interview, that does also depend on where you're doing it. 6 to 10 months is about the average for an adjustment of status right now. And then you get that conditional green card, which you keep for, like I said, 1 year, 9 months. And then that 3-month window opens for us to do the I-829. The removal of conditional residency takes about a year. And once you get that, you're pretty much done for the green card. I know it sounds like a long time, but there's no backlog right now for most countries, unless you're from China. Even Vietnam, it's really not a significant backlog, but it's definitely a pretty fast way to get a green card relative to EB-2 or EB-3. So investor requirements. I want to invest. What do I need to do? Prove where your funds came from. Again, that's probably the hardest thing you're going to have to do throughout this whole thing, is to figure out what money you want to use and how you can prove where you got it. You can actually use money from, obviously accumulated earnings, stocks, sales, home. If you own a home in the Bay Area, you probably have $500,000 in equity. You can actually use a home loan, basically using your home as collateral. It needs to be a collateralized loan. So your buddy can't loan you $500,000 for the investment, but you can use something that has that value in order to get $500,000, like your home. And if you're lucky enough to have somebody to give you $500,000, a gift is a valid way to prove lawful source of funds. But the person who gifts it to you, like your parent or a sibling, will have to prove where they got their money. So a gift does have a little bit of trappings too. We need to prove the source of funds of the gift. Okay. And then updates. Again, for those of you who are in this room, if you're interested in EB-5, you may hear a lot about immigration legislation. And to be very honest, I was just talking to Colin and Aaron about this. There really hasn't been a lot of new proposals even. First of all, it's not terribly likely any new law is going to pass our Congress right now. Secondly, there haven't been even really super new proposals. So the latest thing that's happened, and it's actually been more than a few months now, is to propose an increase in the investment amount. And that's been on the books for a while. So if you ask me, I think they will increase it. It's just a matter of timing. So technically, the earlier you get in, the more likely you'll be able to get in at $500,000 versus, for example, $925,000, which is the proposed increase right now. Calculating the quota backlog. So there are quota backlogs in certain countries, like I mentioned, China and Vietnam being one of them. There's some proposals to maybe change the way the calculation's done to not create such a deep backlog for citizens of certain countries. And TEA designation, there's certain proposals to actually federalize the way the TEAs are actually calculated. And again, these are proposed. Nothing's changed so far, but these are things that could potentially affect how much it costs to actually invest as an investor. And the last thing is actually a good thing, and I'm sure we would invite it, is increased oversight of the regional centers. There's several hundred regional centers out there. A lot of them aren't even really functioning. So the idea would be to have more oversight. And I think it really just helps investors to have government oversight of regional centers and how they're run and whether there's actually legitimate business people running them. So that's one of the proposed legislations. So that's it for me for right now. I will hand it over to Colin to talk about the graduate, and we'll be back for question and answer.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Aaron. So today I'm proud to present to you the graduate. It's our premier EB-5 project offered here in the Silicon Valley. It is extremely rare to be able to identify a target employment area within the Silicon Valley, San Jose, in areas that we believe to be of high quality, but still can get us to the minimum $500,000 investment amount. So we're going to take you through all of the important salient facts, a quick introduction, learn about the development team, about the location of the graduate, besides what you might already know being local here to San Jose, the investment terms of this EB-5 offering, the job creation elements, and then the investment and the security that comes with it. And most importantly, we'll leave you sufficient time for questions and answers, because I know all of you probably are curious as to certain details and or your own personal situations. This project, like I mentioned, has a very, very complete set of ideal aspects. It's being ran by a top-tier development team with multiple billions of dollars and experience to their name. We, as a regional center, have maintained a 100% approval rate across all adjudicated petitions from USCIS. It's a student housing asset directly across the street from San Jose State. It's a loan-style investment, which tiers on the more safe side of all investment structures versus equity or anything else. And most importantly, the job creation element of this project has actually already been completed. As you guys may have seen, the project is actually already on its 10th floor. So meaning more about the development team, it's ran by AmCal Equities. They are a professional student housing developer. This is their day job. This is what they do day in and day out. They manage and have developed over 115,000 student housing beds. Swinson is the development partner as well as the construction contractor. You might have seen their signs all around town throughout the Silicon Valley because they're actually one of the largest developers and contractors active in the South Bay. They have a 105-year history and are a staple here to the local economy. Our company, Behring, we ourselves are a developer and have about $500 million of real estate that's in progress right now, as well as being the regional center. And we'll be sponsoring the EB-5 investors with USCIS through our approved EB-5 regional center. Swinson, just to really punch home their experience and the amount of impact they've had. These buildings throughout San Jose, Century Towers, Centera, right downtown next to the San Pedro Market, Tamian Station and City Heights, these were all done by Barry Swinson Builder. So we have the right people building this project. The EB-5 team, our regional center has an experience of about $2.5 billion of real estate as far as market value. The I-924 filing was filed by David Hearson. They have been in the business for a long time, even since the early 1990s when the program started. Charles Kaufman of Homeyer & Law had written all of our investment documents and securities. They've dealt with 500 plus EB-5 matters. Jeff Carr, the economist who calculates the job creation, puts together all the reports and finally is submitted with the I-829 petition to get the permanent green card. All of these people have worked on a lot of EB-5 projects, and what that means is that you get daily communication and daily response from USCIS. Like Cindy and Fragman, when you have hundreds of investors that you've served, that also means that you're getting hundreds of responses, meaning you can stay up to date with exactly what USCIS wants to see. Our project history, we're now on our 6th fund, but our 9th actual project, and that's just for EB-5 and not including any of the other private real estate developments. As you can see, we have a very strong preference for residential assets. We've always felt more comfortable with the business models and how stable it is. A lot of you with second passive investments, you might be investing in second homes or apartments or rental properties. It's because we all feel more confident in something you can live in. So our history is littered with residential projects since the beginning of our development. Our regional center, like I mentioned, has 100% approvals across all adjudicated petitions. We've had no denials, and partly to thank is that we have a very simple business model. We stick to residential assets where 100% of the job creation really comes out of construction. We spend the money on the construction, you build the building, and you're done. There's no operating risk to our job creation. You're not trying to make sure a factory keeps running for the next 5 years. You're not betting on a hotel being to stay full until 2023. All we have to do is build the building, mark up that job creation, send it to USCIS, and the I-829s will get approved from the job creation aspect. The project description for the graduate itself, it's located here in downtown San Jose. It's in the heart of Silicon Valley. And taking a closer look, you'll even see that the asset itself is 400 feet away from San Jose State's front gate. You can't miss it. And we always make the joke that it's actually roll out of bed close to San Jose State, thinking of our wonderful students. Downtown San Jose area is very vibrant. You have the global headquarters of Adobe and many multinationals. We're in the SOFA district, the south of First. A lot of art walks and other events here in downtown San Jose. The asset itself, it's grade A all around. When you look at the quality of the building, the facilities, the amenities, the gym, the 14,000 feet of retail space at the ground floor, the fact that it's less than 1 block away from a light rail station stop, and again, it's right next to San Jose State. There's not much more we would ask for from the investment community to invest in an asset like this. It is right in the bullseye of an institutional quality investment. Salient facts-wise, it's 19 floors, over 315,000 square feet of rentable real estate, and there's an amount of parking, but it wasn't a major focus because of the student housing positioning. The ratio is 1-to-1. 260 apartments, and that equates to about 1,000 beds when it comes to student housing. You can see the podium. It's in the middle of this L-shaped building. That's where all the amenities, the gym, student lounges, and there's multiple media lounges and computer study rooms as well. The retail and the L-shape high-rise and glass facade wrapping that building. As far as the investment, we style all of our EB-5 investments currently as loans, and that's because of the security, investment, and protections that you can negotiate into those loan agreements. It's a fixed $500,000 investment. That's the minimum according to USCIS, and we're able to qualify through getting accredited as a target employment area through the Governor's Office of California. There's a written letter that confirms we qualify. It's not a guessing game, it's firm and secure. The loan itself earns an interest rate of 0.25% per year for a 5-year term. Some people ask, why is the interest rate so low? The best way to explain it is that we use a low interest rate to purchase higher protections, security, and guarantees. We all want to make sure that we successfully complete the EB-5 investment, earn permanent immigration and the green card, and get our money back. In order to get higher protections, and in order to get better guarantees and security, the way to do that is to purchase it through low-cost capital. The developers are much more willing to provide outsized protection if it's worth it. So this low-cost loan earns us multiple protections and guarantees, which I will outline on the next slide. When you are doing a loan, the best thing to look at is, what is my security? And in this case, it's the entire building. There's a 100% equity pledge that is pledged to our EB-5 fund, where if they do not pay us on time in full, we have the right to foreclose on the entire asset. And the entire asset also has a construction completion guarantee, meaning that if they take $1 of EB-5, they absolutely have to finish the building, which means we'll be delivered finished apartments in any case. And as far as what we call the capital stack, for a loan, it's important to know exactly how much money is in your security. The developer has put in $46 million into this project already. Their money goes in first. They're the first in and last out. After that, there's 15%, or the $28.5 million from the EB-5 fund, and it's followed by a senior bank loan at 60%, or $112 million. The total cost of the project is at $188 million. The important thing to take away from this is the developer has put in more money than we have. It's more at risk, and they intend for this thing to be built very smoothly and get it all back. And if they're that engaged and they have more to lose than we do, that's a good position to be in as a lender. Moving on. This is the package of protections and guarantees that through our multiple years of doing EB-5, this is the best way to outline your EB-5. You want to make sure that you have protection before, during, and after receiving the permanent green card. Before receiving the green card, we have an I-526 money-back guarantee. This essentially says that if for any reason that your I-526 was denied, the investors would be returned their capital and their fees 100%. The construction completion guarantee is while the project is under construction, you have that guarantee to make sure that the asset is delivered. The apartments are going to be finished, and that is our security and what will be backing the loan from the EB-5 investors. Lastly, the 100% equity pledge. If anything, if we were not to be repaid on time and in full at the end of the 5-year term, we have the option to foreclose on the asset, take control of it, and recover our money that way. It's just like a bank loan and a lender for a mortgage or a commercial real estate loan. So how good is it to actually be located right across the street from San Jose State? How much security does that give us? As one example, this was a newscast from ABC News last year in the summer where San Jose State was kind enough 2 months before the school year started to notify over 1,400 students that they were not guaranteed housing on campus because they're too full. There's simply not enough student housing to accommodate all of the incoming freshmen, let alone sophomores, juniors, seniors, and grad students. San Jose State has over 32,000 students. They've had 100% growth in international students in their student body, and to say the least, 98% occupancy across the board for the last 25 years straight. We're not worried about the growth or the need for student housing at San Jose State. As far as the repayment and the loan security, it was always better to kind of look at it graphically and to see exactly how much protection there is in the project. And according to an appraisal that was done before the construction was started, the entire asset was worth a market rate completed at $220 million. The entire project cost is at $188 million, which is this mark right here. And there was about a 15% profit margin overall. That profit margin, again, considered part of your security or the buffer of your investment, but it also includes the developer's equity. So that $46 million that they already invested, that's our security too. Overall, when you look at the value of this building, we just need to get the money back for the senior loan and our small EB-5 piece, and altogether you're looking at about $141 million out of a project that was appraised at $220. So the building theoretically could drop 35% from its market value according to an appraisal, and we still get repaid 100%. Even in the financial crisis, you did not see rental apartments drop 35%. So this is a good place for us to be in. And then informally, we're also aware that there were unsolicited offers to purchase this building already as it's under construction at over $250 million. So the market is running in the right direction. We're heading in the right trend. And this is a project that we jumped on as an opportunity for EB-5 and investment because of all these great benefits. As far as the job creation, like I mentioned, this is as easy as it gets and is the safest way to record job creation. It's through the construction alone. And as a regional center, we're pre-approved to do what we call indirect job creation or indirect reporting, where we have an economic impact report. It calculates the amount of jobs that we create through construction. All we have to do is take the construction receipts, bottle all those up, and put them in a nice package for USCIS. They see the construction receipts that actually verify the report, and we're done. So it's just an accounting game that if you spent the money on construction, then you're done. There's no operational risk. We don't have to run a hotel or restaurants for the next 5 years. We just need to build it, and then we're done. The green cards, from the job creation perspective, are secured. And then also the biggest benefit and one of the most confidence building items for this project is the fact that it's already under construction. It's already on its 10th floor. It's very real. You can walk across the street. It's tangible and extremely believable. Another photo, we had the economists run a preliminary report on the construction draws and the expenditures to date. We've actually already created over 600 jobs. This is in excess of the 570 jobs we needed for every single investor to actually be fully qualified from a job creation perspective. The entire project in its entirety is going to create over 3,000 jobs. EB-5 is a very small portion of this project, which makes it a very easy number to clear. So when you're looking at this thing in full, the job creation aspect's already been met. The investment itself secured by a Silicon Valley student housing asset. This is exactly where you'd like to be as far as choosing an investment. We also offer free EB-5 investment planning. Some of you have already worked with us, and we've actually already developed what we call your PIP, where it actually takes you through schedules and cost estimates and your source of funds strategies. And we prepare these preliminarily to be able to hand to somebody like Cindy and Fragment, so they already know your elements of history, they know your financial background, and they can move through the process quicker and get your I-526 filed faster. So if you're really interested in EB-5, we're happy to do this. Just contact us and we'll take you through the discovery call, get all those items identified, and it'll help you further prepare and know exactly what you need to do to complete this process. So with EB-5 investment, it is important to know that we're all here in the United States, H-1Bs and the like. There is an accredited investor status, and it's met in two different ways. It's an SEC requirement. We'll help you with accredited investor verification, preparing a source of funds, and taking you through this entire process. Now for the most important aspect of our seminar, and the part we know is the most valued to you, is the question and answer period.
Okay, great question. The H-1 is, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, a non-immigrant visa status in the United States. So people come in temporarily on an H-1B. It has a 6-year limit. You may pursue permanent residency while you're on an H-1B. The H-1 is unique in that it's a dual intent visa, meaning that unlike a student, unlike a visitor visa or something like that, you actually can pursue a green card while you're on an H-1B. So there's no problem with actually pursuing an EB-5 while you're on an H-1B. The EB-5 does not disrupt your H-1B, and the H-1B does not influence your EB-5. Think of them as parallel train tracks. And if you have an employer-sponsored green card through EB-2 or EB-3, you can do EB-5 in addition. So you actually don't have to pick one horse and ride it. You can actually start different permanent residency tracks and then basically finish with the one that gets you there the fastest. So for those of, again, EB is employment-based immigration. There's only 140,000 green cards granted each year for everyone, the entire world. And the US is very egalitarian in that every country gets the same number. So India gets the same number as Iceland, and China gets the same number as Canada. But we don't have the same number of immigrants coming into the US from those countries. So there's huge backlogs for people coming from India and China. And if today the visa bulletin came out for September, and the whole world is retrogressed for EB-2 and EB-3 for September. So we're getting towards the end of the fiscal year. No question, in my mind, if you're from India or potentially even China, certainly the EB-5 would be tremendously faster. Even EB-2, you're looking at double-digit years when it comes to the wait time. And I'm not trying to sell you anything, that's just the reality of it. Because if you're looking at 2009, right, that's the priority date right now for EB-2 and EB-3. That was actually the downturn in the economy. So those were probably fewer people applying for immigration in 2009 and 2010 than there were in 2012 to 2018. So you're still on 2009. It's really just going to get longer, and so, the reality is that EB-2 and EB-3 for individuals from India, China's not even as bad as India. India is really the worst. EB-5 is clearly, hands down, the faster way to go. All the questions are coming from you, Colin.
Yeah, we're going to the floor now. That's the cutoff for Colin's questions, but those were important ones that we got multiple times via the email request, and a lot of you were kind enough to submit. Is there anybody on the floor that has specific questions that they would like to get answered? And Cindy here would be happy to provide that answer.
So source of funds questions, depending on what country you're from, the type of documentation available is really varied. But first thing to keep in mind is we don't need to track all the money. You're only tracking 500,000. So really you're trying to isolate the $500,000 for the investment. So the first piece of advice is usually find the easiest money you can track. If there's multiple sources of earnings or accumulation of wealth, what's traceable? What part of it is easier to figure it out? The other answer is to be very honest, on a practical level, things that are older are actually a little bit easier. We can usually get accountants and other people, experts involved, to talk about why documents weren't available in 1990 for a transaction that happened back then, right? So there are certain affidavits. There's a lot of different ways. It's a very fact-specific question, but generally speaking, I would say, again, you're not tracing everything. Isolate the 500,000. Sometimes the answer is actually using an asset and taking out a loan alone because it's traceable. So I would say there's a lot of different things, and it's very fact specific. But isolating the money and trying to figure out what particular source of funds is probably the easiest to trace, and using that particular fund.
Repeat the question.
So the question was really, if you have an H1, and let's say the H1, something goes wrong with the H1, you don't have H1 anymore. The first question seemed like, do you have to be physically in the U.S. for this to continue? No. Where you are is actually not relevant at all. Actually, we have a ton of investors who are outside the U.S. and waiting for this to come through. So you can either be in the United States. It's a procedural difference and not a regulatory one. So if you're in the U.S., we file with the U.S. Immigration Service to get your green card. If you're abroad, we go to the U.S. consulate. That's really the practical difference. It's really not a legal difference. And the other question was about whether you can have both running. And the answer is yes. You can have the H1, which is a dual intent visa, and permanent residency going on at the same time, and it won't affect your H1B. A supplemental question is whether or not the EB-5 filing gives you any benefit to remain in the U.S. if your H1 goes south and you no longer have H1B. It actually doesn't. You need a non-immigrant visa to be in the United States. This one, until you get your green card, it really doesn't give you a basis. So while you're going through the I-526, there's really nothing for you to use to stay in the U.S. Temporary green card, absolutely. It's a regular green card. The only difference is that it has an expiration that's 2 years that we need to monitor for you. But the temporary green card and the regular green card is exactly the same. And in fact, those 2 years apply towards your citizenship. So it's just like a regular green card. It's just that there's that hitch. At 2 years, we need to get Collins documents, file an the I-829 with the Immigration Service. But the H1 to keep you in the U.S. while you're waiting for that temporary green card is pretty important.
And the exemplar filings for the Madison Park deal and 5 other assets have all been approved. We're using the same system for everything. If you look at all our projects, it might look kind of boring. Residential apartments and construction-based job creation, we don't do anything different. So from the first project we've had to the graduate, the strategies are all the same. They've all been approved. Really, the only difference is going to be the investor's source of funds, because that is all individualized. The projects are major templates. It's a 1,500 pages, 2,000 pages of documentation prepared by consultants that have worked on over 700 to 800 different EB-5 projects. It's really not high risk to get approved if you keep it simple. Just don't do anything really sophisticated and confusing. So if you're trying to do saltwater vegetable farming or some sort of new battery tech, USCIS is just going to be as confused as you are. And to have to educate them on every aspect of that business and then convince them that you will actually create the jobs you say you will is really hard. When you look at a construction project like the graduate, it's type 1 concrete construction. It's done every day throughout the United States, and there's 1,000 sources that prove what the Silicon Valley should be spending to build that building. We just take all those third-party datas and all those third-party reports, match them up with our assumptions, and say, look, 100 people agree with us that this building will create this amount of economic impact. It's almost irrefutable. And the documents are designed that way, so that there's 1,000 reasons. Yeah, so we have 5 I-924 approvals and I-526 exemplars, and then the latest 2 projects are pending. So those ones are still pending. But it's because, unfortunately, we're all waiting for USCIS in several accounts. And if they were to approve things in a week, we'd all be better off. Yeah, and I could pull up a different slide, but this is a great question, because when asking where is the project at, when do I need to create the jobs, and how long do I have to report them? In the business plans and like the exemplar filings, USCIS wants to see a 30-month window. They want to say, you, the investor investing now, 30 months from today, you're going to have to file an I-829. It's 2 years of the conditional residency period, but they also give you 6 months for your change of status, because they expect it to take a little bit of time after your I-526 is approved to get to the United States if you were out of the country and start creating your jobs. So 30 months is that window. We've already created a whole bunch of jobs, and we actually all get credit for those jobs before, after, anything involved in this project. Because EB-5 was part of the business plan from the start, whether you're in this project today, tomorrow, a year from now, the entire project counts as your job creation. So the fact that we've created 600 jobs already benefits everybody that signs up. So it's not 10 jobs after you went into the partnership. We're essentially banking jobs ahead of time right now. The project started construction in December and was fully underway in January. Right, and the project will be completed for the 2020 school year, so probably June, July. There's 2 more years coming of construction. But the best part of the job creation window is that if, like as far as your filing, the reality of what's going on is that if you filed today, the project already has 600 jobs, but you still have maybe 15, 18 months of I-526, then that 30 months. We actually have more about 50 to 60 months of job creation window. It's almost irrefutable that you're going to have 2 or 3 times as many jobs as you really need. It's just USCIS only allows us to look at 30 months in our business plan. But in reality, they'll look at anything from the beginning of the project to the very last day. Okay, so good question. Been reading your material on the USCIS website. It does refer to talking about the job creation element and having to last 2 years. And Cindy, you can jump in with technical items if I botch it. But the job creation lasting for 2 years is actually in regard to direct hiring. So if I ran a hotel, if I ran a restaurant, and I was hiring people direct, I need to go find real individuals with W-2s, tax returns, social security numbers. That individual and that full-time job does need to last for 2 years. As a regional center, I mentioned that we're using indirect job creation. We're using the economic impact report that actually exemplifies that our project creates the equivalence of 1,900 plus jobs. Those jobs are actually measured by the entire project proceeding and the construction expenditures being spent. And then that goes through the model, which in this case is called REDINE. It's an economic model where it just counts our expenditures and our construction spending, which we use construction receipts and invoices from all the contractors to exemplify. Those invoices only have to happen once, and they go through the model, they come out as job creation, and that's it. So, for example, construction in the Silicon Valley, or technically Santa Clara, for every $1 million we spend on hard cost construction, it might be worth 11 jobs. It's a multiplier, 11 jobs per $1 million. If I show them $1 million of hard cost construction, we got 11 jobs. I just need to show the actual number of spend. It's not really tied to a 2-year schedule. For the multipliers in the model, they either get bigger or smaller depending on the length of your construction period. So USCIS would look at the first invoice versus the last one, see that you did exceed a 2-year span, and we qualified for higher multipliers. So that $1 million of spend is worth the 11 jobs, whereas if I only had a 5-month construction schedule or a 11-month or 15-month, it might have been worth 6. And that's just a method within the model on how they create jobs. The economist does all this for us, and they calculate everything as far as what the model will compute. But this project is a 30-month total construction schedule. We're not even close to the 24-month barrier. So like in the slide, the most important thing for us is to collect the construction draws. As a lender, every single month, the project will submit invoices and say, I need to pay the contractors. That's all their bills and all their invoices in a package. Then according to that package, we send however much money they need in order to pay just those bills. We don't just take the $500,000, launch it into the project and say, good luck. We have to monitor the construction just like a bank. So if the work has been completed and those invoices that were submitted to us are actually on site and done and they need to be paid, that's when the money goes out. So USCIS will look at those same numbers.
your money can come in after the job creation starts because EB-5 was contemplated in the business plan. So as long as EB-5 was built in when the business plan was created, it doesn't matter when the EB-5 investor comes in. So it's not like they need to pool all of you and wait for the 50 whatever million dollars, and then you all have to wait until the 57th person to do the investment. This model is a lot more flexible. The Immigration Service allows you to enter into this project and take into account all the jobs that were done in the last 8 months, because 8 months ago when the business plan was written, it already contemplated EB-5 in the capital stack. So regardless of when the investor enters into the project, you get the benefit of the entire project. So that's my more simplistic answer. And to answer your question about the 2 years, maybe from an immigration perspective, there's direct investment and then there's indirect investment. If you were to buy a Jamba Juice, you'd have to have 10 employees for 2 years, right, for that Jamba Juice. But if you do a project like this, there's tons of people they're employing, right, to build. There's contractors, architects, electricians. So they're not looking at the jobs, they're looking at spend. So the way regional centers benefit investors is that you take this formula. It's really simple, and I don't even know the math that Colin knows, but basically you take a number of how much money is spent, and then it spits out a job creation number. And your job as an investor is to see what the output is with how many job creation there is. And you do get to take into account the entire project, regardless of when you come in.
Yeah, and then another principal item for everybody to soak in as well is that USCIS, from the paper regulations of what they're asking you to do and having bullet points of your exact targets versus what takes place in the real world, they're actually a lot more flexible than you'd imagine. And that's just because USCIS looks at this, and even in the adjudicator's manual, the guidelines for job creation, the investment, even the source of funds is more likely than not, the investor needs to have met the requirements. So 51%. It's not like a murder trial where it's beyond a reasonable doubt and 100% sure that something took place. It's more likely than not. And then there's even cases where people have filed I-829s where they didn't create all 10 jobs, but they really tried, and they still got approved. So USCIS in reality, especially the timelines and when things took place, they understand that the real world doesn't exactly go to book. So if things are a couple months left and right, whatever it might be, they accept that. And you have a business plan, you try to stick to it. And in the end, if you had a project that wasn't under construction and it wasn't actually proceeding, when your I-526 is approved according to a business plan, you could even switch projects if it wasn't actually moving forward. It's called a material change. It's painful, and the attorneys don't want to do it. But theoretically, there's a lot of options to save your EB-5 investment and your green card that are in the back waiting in the wings if you needed it. So, Cindy mentions like the technicalities and the itty-gritty details. We watch it every day. And it's our entire existence is based on trying to protect the investors and keep you on track. As you're doing your due diligence and you're looking into EB-5 and trying to understand like what is a safe investment, is this where I want to be? It's important to research those items, but it's essentially our day-to-day job to protect you in all of those circumstances and understand those details to the upteenth degree. Most of these questions revolve around schedules, and then on the regional center side, how many people have passed through which stages. The first project that we had go full cycle, the investment itself went very quickly. That project, we started raising capital in 2015, at the end of 15. Then that project probably had people approved starting in 2017. It was about an 18-month process for those first investors. They had an adjustment and change of status that took 8 months or so out of South Africa, was the first investor. And that took us into mid 2017, and only late 2017 that they had conditional residency. That first stack of investors now is in their conditional residency phase. But the project itself is actually totally finished, built, rented out, 100% full, and they even sold it at the end of last year And those investors were reinvested into an apartment building as a senior loan, and they're waiting for their conditional residency periods to finish. Their job creation's done, but they file I-829s. The first set will file next year. So we haven't had a full cycle investor because USCIS processing times, just to get the regional center approved, it took us about a year. That was in 2013 to 14. And from there, the first projects to raise capital were in 2015. So you can't even raise one investor until you have the approval. So that's when those projects start. And for the landing at College Square, like I said, it's full cycle. Then Madison Park was another $17.5 million fund. Those apartments, the first phase is built, completed, renting, and the money is just as a loan to the project. The first asset is Gallo Lofts. It's right next to the Alameda Estuary near Fruitvale BART station. Totally done. And that's rented and stabilized. And then Hollis Muse is another 124 unit apartments right next to Emeryville where the IKEA is, if anybody's been up there. That will actually open for leasing in September, next month. So again, like after those projects are finished, we just remain as a loan, and it's just a leasing apartment building, and it rents. They're 5-year terms. So when you're asking about the investment term, no matter what's going on with USCIS and their processing times, our investment is intended to be a 5-year investment. And also for USCIS, they've also cleared up that you only need to remain invested until your I-829 is filed. You don't have to be approved. You just have to have it filed, because essentially if you have filed an I-829, that means that your job creation and your investment is complete. Did I say that right? Okay. All right, yeah, so even if the I-829 processing time lengthens and it actually becomes 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, it actually doesn't matter, because your conditional green card will be extended indefinitely while your I-829 is processing. I think they're in 1-year increments, but they will give you extensions as it's processing. Your job creation's done, and we do have the ability to repay the investors, and we're only in it for a 5-year term. So if you filed an 829 within 5 years, the loans are matured and they need to be paid back. For retrogression, India right now is the hot topic because it's a moving target. We know there's a lot of Indian investors that are paying attention to the program. They've realized it's a faster gateway than EB-2 or EB-3. And if there is retrogression for India, it's going to start slow. So what that means is that if it's retrogression, there's a backlog, it's going to start at 1 year. Then it's according to the government's fiscal year, which is in September 30th. It's not December. So even September 30th of this year will open up the next allocation of 700 visas for India. And even if it's 2 years or 3 years, going into that 5-year investment, if there's more than 2 to 3 years of 2 to 3 years of retrogression, you might have to look at some sort of redeployment. And that just means staying invested while you have your conditional green card, because it took you longer to get into the conditional green card phase, to get the change of status. If that requires redeployment, we essentially will just either stay in the asset as a loan, or we go into a like-kind investment with similar protections and guarantees that looks identical to that, and we just keep going until you can file an 829. It would be the change of status. So when the 526 is approved, that's when you're going to be not able to effectuate or apply for the I-485 change of status. So that's something that we all wish was different, that it was actually after the conditional green card. And there's a lot of things politically that are hot topics for people in Washington right now. But as of now, there's no change, and it would be retrogressed, and you'd be waiting for the change of status. What that means for all of our H-1B individuals, or people that are here on conditional employment-based visas, keep that in status until you're able to file a 485. Your lifestyle won't change very much, and you're here, and that's actually a major benefit compared to our investors in China. They're stuck overseas, and they're just waiting. But being able to be here, you just need to keep the visa that you have in status and just wait for the 485. Aaron and Kyle are way smarter than I am. So if you ever call the office, anybody here can answer these questions, because like I said, we do this every day. And for the age out question, it's really technical, and that's something that we'll follow very closely alongside you. How old is your daughter now? 13. Okay, 13, you're sitting in a much better position. We've had people come to us at 20 years, 11 months trying to figure this out. And they've got about 13 hours to file an I-526. So technically, the age freezes. When you filed an I-526 petition, USCIS will freeze your child's age. And then that will remain frozen until the I-526 is approved. So that 15, 18 months, 24 months if you're not very blessed, that age will freeze. Your child will remain 13 years old. After the I-526 is approved, though, that clock is going to start back up. So when you run into a retrogression type situation, when you're in the Chinese backlog, where you're talking about a 7, 8, 9, 15-year wait, nobody knows, that 13-year-old child potentially is at risk. And I believe from there you might want to answer what happens in a retrogress case when the child ages out after an I-526 was approved.
Yeah, the Child Status Protection Act, which is what Colin was referencing about freezing the age, does give you credit for a certain time that the government takes to process your case. But the clock does restart again during retrogression. It is very fact specific, and it actually is different if you're doing an adjustment of status versus consular processing too. So it is something that's really that did need to be calculated. I literally do sit down with a formula and a piece of paper with your children's dates and everything in the backlogs just to try to figure out what that looks like. But just to go back to a 13-year-old, to be very honest, did you know that your priority date's established when your I-526 is filed? So assuming that it takes 18 months for the I-526 or 20 months or 24 to get it adjudicated, even if it backlogs for 2 years, there's no net loss in time for you if there's a retrogression. So it needs to really be severely retrogressed or severely backlogged in order for it to literally affect your actual green card timeline, because you have to wait for the I-526 to be approved anyway before you can file that I-485. And the day you file your I-526 is the day you kind of get that ticket at the deli counter, right? Your place in line for the green card. So retrogression, to be very honest, I think for India is a non-issue today. If you're talking to me tomorrow, next year, or a couple of years from now, I think we may have a little bit more of an issue. But as far as just my 2 cents on India retrogression for EB-5, if you file today, chances are slim that it will seriously affect your overall net timeline for the green card. So therefore, children really shouldn't have an issue, because you're really moving. There's zero backlog time for your child to actually, age out. But it's a very fact specific. I don't want to get too technical on the CSPA, Child Status Protection Act, but there are certain protections that are put into place for children who are getting to that age.
Yeah, at 13 years old, like she mentioned, it's very, very unlikely it's an issue at all. There was always kind of a long-standing principle when China started to retrogress that we started talking about 18 is the new 21. If you had children that were 18, that's where they felt comfortable filing. But their retrogression is far more severe than India or any other country.
That's a great question. If you have a family base, so you have the FB as well as an EB, completely independent, you can have those going on at the same time. So if you have a parent sponsoring you or a sibling sponsoring you, you have an I-130 that's already pending, it makes no difference. You can still do the I-526. They're completely independent. I-829 denial, that's a great question. You technically, as of the date of denial, that permanent residency does go away. There are appeal processes, so you have remedies if a case is denied by the USCIS. There's motions to reopen, motions to reconsider, appeals. So it definitely does depend on why it's denied and what remedies you have available to you. But it is kind of scary. I mean, there is a loss of status as of the date of the denial. So you have to, again, look at the circumstances as to what remedies are available based on the reasoning of the denial.
And just to add on to that, it is scary to think, what if the 829 is denied and all this effort was for nothing? More importantly is, how do you get denied at the 829 stage? And from that standpoint, there's really only 2 items that are referenced for approval, and it's the investment being sustained through the conditional residency period and the job creation. The job creation right now is irrefutable, and it's already evidenced, and it's there, and it's going to continue for the next 2-3 years. There's gonna be 3,000 jobs that come out of this, and we only need 570. We're 400, 500, 600% over the minimum requirement. That's not gonna be an issue for you at 829. Sustaining the investment is also really simple if we just don't take the money out too early. So the ones where you have problems are the projects that never started. You know, they never got out of the ground. There was never a crane in the air. There was a rendering, a plan, an idea, but didn't start. Even in that standpoint, if your 526 was approved, if the project never started, your money is probably in escrow. It's sitting and waiting, and you theoretically could just change projects. You'd file a material change, get going, and figure it all out and move forward and file the 829 with job creation. So either way, there are so many forks in the road, there decisions can be made to fix your EB-5 circumstances. And with a group like ours, where we've been around for 30 years in the Bay Area, or 40 now, we have access to all kinds of other projects. And theoretically, if you were already invested, you have the I-526 for a project like this, where all that job creation, everything was explained to USCIS, and they approved you, it's actually easier to go find a project the day the money is already there waiting, and you could pick any project you want in a target employment area and go from there. So that's not even the end of your opportunity if somehow this wasn't already under construction and not moving forward. And it would be upon us to make sure that all of those kinks get worked out if there were any. So to get denied, it's either job creation or the investment. In this situation with a simple project that's a construction loan, those are two really easy criterion to check the box. Because there's no source of funds at that point, and there's no other outliers that you can't see coming. It's literally the job creation and sustaining the investment. There's a couple different timelines. Our most recent I-526 was approved in 15 months. According to the website right now, if you were to look at USCIS, their publicized wait time, I believe, is closer to 24. That's on the website. And it can kind of fall anywhere in between. And actually the technical reality, and if, I don't know, Cindy, you can either confirm or deny, but with USCIS, they do these in stacks, where they take 10 people all in the same project. They'll grab all of it, drag it to their desk, and approve all of them at the same time. The 10th person might have filed 6 months later than the other first person. So that stack of papers, some of them might have been older than others, and you hear about the phantom 3-month approval, where it's like, our project's so great that there's a 3-month approval. Technically, there's just somebody, there's somebody that got dragged in the stack, happened to file 3 months ago, but the poor first guy might be 2 years old. So when it bounces around like that, or if there's another regional center that tells you we get 3-month approvals, ask the details. So, but it does bounce, but right now expect anything from 15 to 24 months. Okay, so there's, like USCIS, there's 2 different versions. There's like the paper regulation version, and then there's the reality. So the paper regulation version, where it's like our offering documents, it is a 5-year commitment, because I can't go to the banks and I can't go to the project, say, hey, here's an investment, but by the way, I want to yank it from you at any time. Also, if we have withdrawal provisions, where it means that you can quit at any time, technically your investment's not at risk, because all of a sudden you see one cloud in the sky, want to yank your money. USCIS actually wouldn't approve a project with a withdrawal provision. It needs to be at risk. So we can't actually offer the get out of jail free card per se. We can't offer a withdrawal provision. But the reality is, if we know that you have a green card and you don't need to go through this process and you don't need to wait for 4 years, 5 years, what we can do is work our hardest to replace you with an investor that does need EB-5. So when that replacement investor is procured and found, invested into the project, we would be able to trade you out. And we know that certain individuals, if they're sitting with a 2010 priority date or 2009 but haven't been approved, if they wanted to try EB-5, that's great. But honestly, we do expect 5-year commitments, and for those people to be in. But as this project progresses, it gets more attractive. It gets better and better because it's more mature, it's easier to see, and there's more job creation. The ability to replace an investor actually gets easier and easier. And even as it proceeds even further, and there's a lot of I-526 approvals and everything else, the attractiveness of this project will increase. So even if you spent some time in the project, the ability to replace an investor actually gets easier. So we would work with you as hard as we can to replace the investor and get out, but according to the documents, there won't be a withdrawal provision where you can just quit, because then you actually would have never been approved to start. Is that correct? Okay. Okay, so the accredited investor requirement has nothing to do with USCIS or the green card. It's actually an item for the investment. It's required by the SEC, our Securities and Exchange Commission. It is an investor protection item that private placements that are not registered securities or like a public company, we have to go through accredited investor verification where we are only soliciting or offering this investment to sophisticated investors. There's two tests that can meet the accredited investor requirement. One of those is having a net worth worldwide of $1 million, not including the primary residence. So if you have assets in India, here in the United States, real estate, cash, stocks, RSUs, jewelry, cars, boats, any assets, if it's all wrapped up and it's over $1 million, not including the primary residence, that's one qualification. Another qualification is just having an income over $200,000 per year. Or if it's combined with a spouse, it'd be $300,000 per year. And this is verified either through a certified professional, which would be either a CA in India, or a CPA here in the United States, accountant, or an attorney. They would write you a simple letter that says, I've looked at your documentation and reasonably confirmed that you meet the accredited investor requirement. This is only for our compliance purposes. It is not submitted to the outside world. It doesn't go to USCIS. It is for us. And it's an investment requirement, not immigration. We can help you through that process of verification. And if you have specific questions as to your own personal case, Aaron, Kyle, myself, we're very well versed in the accredited investor requirements, but the requirements are clear. We can just show you the best paths on how to meet them. So target employment areas are actually designated based on unemployment to a census tract. So a census tract is a government statistic of a small piece of downtown San Jose. And California has its own TEA codes for EB-5 where they allow you to actually combine a contiguous 12 census tracts if that average unemployment rate actually equals 150% of the national average. So for example, if the unemployment rate was 5%, we just need to be at 7.5%. Combining census tracts through downtown San Jose south, heading out toward Gilroy and Hollister and the rest of those areas, we were able to assemble an unemployment rate that averaged, I think it was now 7.4% is what the previous statistics were. And we have a letter from the state of California that confirms that this census tract with this project is a target employment area. And the letter, I believe, was finalized in May. So it's good for 1 year, 12 months. Any investor to file within that time with that letter is grandfathered in. You don't need the TEA to maintain next year or the year after. It's at the time of your I-526 filing, and that's it. Yeah, so the fees aren't included as what we call registered capital. So they are just fees. So those are expenses and cost recovery for originating the project, for the management of 5 or more years. Nobody actually knows how long that we have to stay in as management. Typically the administrative fee, the attorney's fees, things like that, they're not considered registered capital. So it's not something that is repaid. One thing that will help that situation in the future is if we have different styles of investment. And we can talk about any of those in the future where if we do something that's more private equity, if it's more at risk and it's on the equity side, that's something that's normal for that part of the world rather than the EB-5 debt style investments. And it's something that might come as soon as we see regulation changes where if investors have to do $1 million or 900,000, we would renegotiate, or on our next deals, we would negotiate different positions in those investments because you're placing more money. And we are already preparing for contingencies in that world. But as of right now, with a minimum $500,000 and being able to do these very low risk, high protection debt style investments, this is as good as we can get, which is, you know, something that we're excited about. Okay, so this is actually the legal structure for the loan. And looking at the project itself, we are actually invested in what we call a limited partnership, and then that limited partnership is going to be making a loan to the project. The funds are going into an escrow account first. It's held by a third party. It's hosted by Granite Escrow and Settlement Services, and they go through BofI Bank. None of the money goes directly to us. After the escrow conditions are cleared, when the I-797 notice of action and a couple other terms are satisfied, the investor's money does come out to the partnership. Then, in accordance to the construction draws and the progress of the project, when they need money and they've actually completed the work that needs to be paid, then that money is dispersed to the project. Then, from that standpoint, it's made as a loan to the construction project itself. The interest rate on that loan is 5%. Then there's a spread where the investors are making the 0.25%. Then there's maintenance, fund administration, accounting, and all the operating costs. The spread in there is what the revenues are to the regional center. And it's a banking relationship. Banks take deposit money and they lend it out for a higher interest rate than they pay the savers. So in this situation, when we're not the development sponsor, there's no profit from the project. We don't have a hand in it. Like, we don't have conflicts of interest. We're simply a lender managing depositor money and loaning it to the project. So there's no conflicts of interest in our structure. There's other projects where we are the developer and the regional center together, and it's just a different style of investment. And some people will look at it and they talk about conflicts of interest. And then on the other side, it means that we have all the motivation to protect that EB-5 money and the most ability to if you're the owner, developer, and in control of the entire process. But in this project, it's a lending relationship. We work for the EB-5 investors and the EB-5 investors alone.
So what happens, let's say you're far enough along in the green card process with your employer that you have an EB-2 I-140, it's already filed and approved. What happens if you file the I-45? Nothing. It sits there. The I-140 approvals probably still help you get your H-1 3-year extensions. Right. If you file the adjustment of status based on the I-526, the EB-2 I-140, it doesn't go away. It kind of sits there and approved as an approval, but you don't need it. It's one's primary and the other one's secondary. You can only use one to file an adjustment of status. It depends on your employer. The I-140 belongs to the company. So most employers don't withdraw I-140s. I represent a lot of companies in the Bay Area. They usually don't. There's no reason for them to. So typically it just sits there dormant. If you wanted to continue to extend your H-1B while your I-45 is going on, you could actually continue to do that and use the I-140 to do that. But really, again, it kind of just falls by the wayside. It's not good nor bad. It doesn't necessarily affect your ability to file the I-45. You can just only file one I-45. So basically, whichever one's current, whichever one allows you to file the I-45, that's the one you'll file.
There are multiple strategies that some married couples will play in this situation where you can get an I-526 approval, you can adjust your status, and you could drop your EB-2 or your I-140. Or there are some groups that, if they're ultra conservative and want to take the utmost protection, one spouse can maintain the EB-5, change their status, go on that route, and the other spouse can maintain their approved I-140 and not join the spouse on the EB-5. They're effectively two different immigration strategies. And if at the I-829 stage there was a problem, you'd still have that approved I-140. And if it is approved and it's done, the other spouse would just apply to join that petition and then get their green card. Whether that's necessary or not, at the time that you're filing the I-485 for your EB-5 investment, you'll already know if the job creation is where it needs to be. You'll already kind of know where you're at as far as risk. And whether it's necessary, you probably could make that decision at that time because it's going to be 12, 15, 24 months from now. So either way, you could do a dual track where one spouse takes the EB-5, the other spouse stays on the I-140. Whether it's necessary or not, I'd like to say no, because we know where we're at with these projects. There's not that much risk at that point. From my understanding, you could do that and you could run dual tracks, and that would allow you to maintain the flexibility to do so. I believe it takes close to 9 months to join the petition if you were to add on potentially. So there's a little bit of a time lag to get that moved over once you do want to join her on the EB-5, but you could do it. So you could maintain dual tracks all the way to the 829 if you plan accordingly. Okay, so this is where the magic of the loan style investment kicks in. It's a loan. We give money to the developer, they promise to pay it back. If they don't pay it back on time, in full, we have the ability to foreclose on the apartments. They have a completion guarantee, which is effectuated by the senior lender, by us, by everybody, where their entire balance sheet is backing their ability to complete this asset. Any sort of lender in today's world will not allow a construction project to start unless they have the full faith and security that they're actually going to be able to finish. The fact that BSB or Swinson, the construction contractor, is a 100-year firm, substantial financial resources, a lot of land, a lot of money behind them that can guarantee that this could get finished. It's also bonded. It's an insurance product. So if they're not able to finish it, the insurance company actually has to come in and hire somebody else to do it. So one way or another, those apartments are getting built. And if they're getting built, that means there's collateral and security, and that means there's value for the lenders. So economic downturn, that's another beauty of being in student housing, because there's a lot of things people are willing to live without in an economic downturn. Their child's education is probably not one of them. So they might not make as much money on the rent, but it will be full, and there will be students at San Jose State. And even in 2009, when the world was exploding and there was a financial crisis and San Jose got hit really hard, colleges were still full. Student education is a constant demand driver, and that's a good place to be if there was a downturn. Also, when you saw the financial crisis play out, it was for sale housing that had the brunt of it. You couldn't sell a house. You couldn't buy a house. You can't get a loan for a house. But when you looked at rental apartments, demand went up because everybody that couldn't buy something became a renter. So this product, which is purpose-built student housing and almost dormitory-style housing, it doesn't have to be student housing. It's a privately owned building where it could be rented to Adobe, Google, Apple. Anybody would be able to fill this thing with anyone that needs a place to live at a much lower rate. These bedrooms, 4-bedrooms apartments, 3-bedroom apartments, 2-bedroom apartments, the rental rates on a bedroom sharing with roommates is as low as $1,000 a month. Go across the street to any of these towers that are right in San Pedro Market Square. You got One South Market, you got Centera, 360 Residence. Those apartments are $3,000 a month. There is an extreme value play that if you just took on a few roommates, which I did, Aaron did, coming out of college, you live with roommates. It's a lot cheaper to share an apartment than live in one all by yourself. This just takes that business model and makes it institutional, professionally managed and professionally cared for. So in an economic downturn, you're actually in a great spot compared to if you were in a 5-star luxury hotel where you're praying that it's full all the time in a downturn. Yeah, so bankruptcy is also a covenant and protection in the loan agreement that if the borrower was to file for bankruptcy, that would technically be a default, and that's where we could actually step in and even start foreclosure proceedings or force a sale. So either way, it goes back to the loan agreements, and bankruptcy is definitely a default. So that would be a position where the lenders could take back the asset before it goes into bankruptcy protection. Well, at that point, you're looking at just getting to the I-526 approval. And then at the I-526 approval, if there really was something that was catastrophic, that's when we could actually file a material change and we could actually move you to a new asset or a different project. The fact that this thing already has its completion guarantees and it's on the 10th floor, and the total partnerships that are involved with this, multiple billions of dollars of equity behind them. I can't say it's impossible, but it's about as close to it as it gets. Well, loan insurance, like there's insurance on the building as far as the construction insurance and the delivery and the bonding, and that's essentially meaning the building has to be completed. No, and there's not a reasonable expectation of anything to insure it from. Like the loan covenants and protections and like the representations in it means that there can't be any previously filed, litigations or problems or clouds on the title. We go through a lot of due diligence to make sure that there's no encumbrances on this site before we actually lend them money. The worst thing you could do is have a problem child, give them a ton of money, and then have somebody else looking for it, right? So that's a normal banking operation to do that due diligence, make sure it's clean before it ever starts. And also the senior loan coming from Acor, where they actually loaned $112 million to this project, they did that homework too. So we actually get to kind of ride on their due diligence as well, their background checks, their methodologies, and we were able to see another set of smart eyes looking over this deal. Right, so Cindy, I'll let you speak for yourself and Fragment and the items that you've heard. But then, just very simply put, what you're talking about is some retroactive policy where it goes back in time, changes the deal on all the poor investors that have already committed. There are instances where this has been considered, but it would be an absolute catastrophe for everybody involved just trying to enact retroactive policy, to go into somebody's wallet and try and rip out more money when you already made a deal. And you already had conditions, and you already have agreements with banks, you already have agreements with insurance companies, you already have agreements with contractors, and people that are relying on that investment. USCIS would not only get sued by all of the investors, which is tens of thousands, they would be sued by every regional center, they'd be sued by every immigration firm, they'd be sued by the construction contractors, the banks, everybody involved. USCIS would receive tens of thousands of lawsuits for what? They don't gain anything. So the IRS, they run into the same things too, where they try to talk about changing tax policy. And if they go retroactive into the past and try and make you refile a tax return for years past, it would be just absolutely catastrophic for them to just administer. It's not realistic. And also, any sort of retroactive language has been dropped from any of the current policy regulation proposals. So there's no hint of retroactive policy at this point.
And some of the most basic tenets of immigration law, which is federal, law, is actually, it's usually from the time of filing, like Colin said, like the TEA. Everything really happens at the time of filing the law as it stands. It's very, very rare for anything to apply retroactively. And secondly, to Colin's point, any law that needs to get passed, it's administrative law. What immigration is. It needs to follow the Administrative Procedures Acts, which means there's comment, notice periods. That's why those things always get dropped. A few months before the law is even contemplated, they actually need to publish it to the public. And attorneys like me and my firm will raise hell if something like that happens, right? So that's what happens. So there is a process for the laws to really change. So it's really unlikely. And in my 18 years of practice, I've really not seen that much be retroactive. And usually when it's usually to the benefit of immigration needs rather than to the detriment, because it's very difficult to actually get something passed that would be detrimental.
First and foremost, I'm not an accountant or CPA, and I'm not your accountant or CPA, so to get a final answer, please consult a licensed professional. But as far as tax from a general principle standpoint, you're taxed on profit. And if you don't have substantial profits that are coming out of an investment, whereas the interest rate here is fairly limited, it's not going to have a material impact as far as profit gain. If it was one of our private equity funds where there are chances and opportunities for substantial profit, you would want to protect yourself from a tax situation or a taxable event. And we have several other tax strategies for those kind of properties, and 1031 exchanges, up-REIT transactions where we convert to stock from REITs. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but in this situation, with a loan style investment with a limited interest rate, there's not going to be a material change. At the end of each year, our fund is going to issue what they call a K1 statement. It's ownership of shares in a partnership. It shows your taxable gain from the interest. It's going to be fairly limited, but we'll just give you that form. You would hand it to your accountant, or you would file it with your tax returns, and it's fairly straightforward. So there's not a lot to consider on the tax side. And all of those will be delivered within 90 days of the end of the fiscal year. That's not the only thing. Okay, so the question was actually, how do we verify the workers, the employees, the 10 employees per investor and things like that. And again, it points back to the difference of direct investment versus indirect investment. If I'm doing the direct investment where I, as an immigrant investor, would buy a franchise, populate it with 10 employees, I do need to make sure I know exactly who that is, W-2s, tax returns, social security numbers, citizenship, and they need real documents. So that weight would be on the immigrant investor, whereas in the indirect methods where it's economic impact, and it's just the construction data and the invoices and all the verification through expenditures, none of that applies, which is one reason why going through a regional center is so much easier, because I can verify 2,000 jobs indirectly just through the construction data, and I don't have to track 1,900 separate individuals. The administration for tracking 2,000 people would just be unreal. So that's why you see 95% of projects right now all go through regional centers using indirect job creation, heavily construction based. It's the best way to do EB-5. It's the most transparent and the easiest to submit for approval. If I had to track 1,900 workers, how many boxes of paperwork would I have to send to USCIS? The administrative burden would be brutal. And for the other question, as far as why do this? Why do EB-5? It's because the interest rate is competitive versus the street. If it wasn't low-cost capital, it wouldn't be attractive. So when people ask, like, why are the returns so low, we're buying an opportunity in a class 1 project that's a world-class student apartment building in a tier 1 city, exactly in the kind of building that you want to invest in. But then with EB-5 investment, there's risk to the developer. We're not exactly sure when each investor is going to show up or if they're going to show up, and all the regulations and everything and the uncertainty, there's an element of risk. So in order to get this quality of a development to play ball with the EB-5 program, our capital is low cost. If regulations change in the future and there's more capital available because it's $1 million, not $500,000, we're probably going to establish different types of projects because it has to be worth it for the investor to take that bump up. And then the game changes. And we'll adjust to market so that it's attractive to the investors, it's attractive to the projects. And the other thing too is when we're 5 or 6 projects deep, our platform's established. Our processes are in order. We're already in this game. It's easier for us to do a 7th project than somebody just starting out to do the first project. So for us to continue this platform and to continue using this knowledge and the experience, it's much easier for us. So it's not as much of a burden for our group than it would be for somebody that was just starting out. It's a scale thing. When asking how do we decide 57 investors, there's a couple different constraints that'll come into play. One of them is the job creation. That's actually the most important. We will always have the investor count and the eligible investors in accordance to how many jobs we create, plus an extra safety buffer. So for example, on every single one of our projects, we've always had at least 20% extra jobs. So if the project creates 100 jobs, we're only going to apply for 80 worth of those jobs. And 80 means that we're going to get 8 investors. It has 10 capable, but we only apply for 8. USCIS might not like some of the receipts, and they might count out some of the jobs that we thought we made. So we always leave that buffer. In this case, the senior loan that came from Acor Capital, they put in the $112 million. They wanted to do 60% of that loan. Then they also wanted the developer to be in there for at least 25%. All that left us was 15%. They wanted to do 60% because that's their business model. They lend money. They wanted more money to go out for this project, and they didn't want to get squeezed down. because they do the same amount of work and they have to spend the same amount of resources tracking that loan. You would rather just loan more money and just make more interest. So the fact that they wanted 60, but they also wanted the developer in there for a minimum 25, we got defined into a 15% band, which is our 28.5 million, which represents the 57 investors. So each project is different. The main thing for the EB-5 fund to understand is that there's plenty of job creation for you as the investor, and there's a safe number. Because of these constraints, we have 600% extra jobs. This project theoretically probably could have raised closer to 70 million or 80 million, but because the senior loan wanted their chunk and they wanted their participation, we're only applying for the 15% or so. The last part of your question, there's a third one. Oh, okay, so in all of our projects, we anticipate bridge financing. And this has become more prevalent because it takes up any sort of unknown or contingency if it's slow. Like what if a project can't find all the investors? The projects that don't have bridge financing have to wait. They have to wait until they find every investor and they start, because you're not going to be able to start construction until you have all the money that you need to complete the building. Nobody will let you start. So in this case, the senior loan, ACOR, they had actually agreed to do a 75% loan, but allow EB-5 to come in for the 15%. So they actually committed to do all of the remaining money if needed, but they would allow EB-5 their spot at the table if it was available. So that gives you the ultimate safety, knowing that if I'm the first investor or the last, no matter what, the project has enough capital to get all the way through. So no matter what, that bridge financing and that insurance that the amount of capital needed will be there is just another attribute of this project that makes it safe. You don't want to be the first investor in a deal that absolutely needs 200 other people to show up and then have to wait to see if that happens. But even in that situation, you can theoretically file a material change and change your project if it doesn't move forward after the I-526 is approved and you change your status. But none of that will happen because this project's already going. Not in this case, but you could do it if you needed to. Okay, so two questions. One of them was, we have a prescribed amount of 57 investors for this fund, and is there any ability to increase that number? In a typical investment, the amount of investment dollars or the investor count is actually adjustable at the discretion of the general partner. We would only do that in the event that there was such sufficient job creation and the project had the ability to accept additional capital. In this project, the graduate, we actually don't have the opportunity to expand the offering because the senior lender specifically wanted their 60%. They want it really bad and they're not willing to budge on giving us more, even if we have the capacity. In other projects, typically we would have the ability to expand in the event that it was appropriate. But 57 investors is the max capacity for this one today. Yeah, so for this specific investment, the graduate was targeted and structured specifically for EB-5. We don't have any abilities with this asset to invest in equity. Their capital stack is already set, the investors are in. It's kind of a really set story. And that's a great thing for the EB-5 investors because nothing's gonna change. They're not looking for other capital, which is a very safe situation to be in. For our other deals, however, things in the future and things that are progressing, we do have private equity opportunities and they range in different styles of investments, but we typically are always in the residential space near transit in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you are looking for real estate investments and things like that, we do have other private opportunities that are profit seeking. They also have EB-5 components added to them. But unfortunately, the graduate is really spoken for. Yeah, so I mean, typically for 57 investors, we're typically closed out potentially 9 to 12 months. That's typically from last month is when we first started selling this. But I mean, we're probably 20 to 25% committed already in a month. And yes, yeah, and some individuals have known us for a while, and they've been circling the project and have started filing petitions. We don't expect this to be available for more than 9 months.